Alright guys, back with another video, and today we're going to have a little bit of fun for myself because I'm going to be talking about the hometown for me, New York Mets. Before I do get in that, I do want to just touch on a couple of things real quick as far as some free agent signings. As I'm sure everyone's heard, Manny Machado went for 10 years, $300 million to the San Diego Padres. And then earlier today, Ervin Santana signed a minor league deal with the Chicago White Sox, and Marwin Gonzalez signed a 2-year, $21 million deal with the Twins. And a couple of days ago, Mike Moustakas went back to the Milwaukee Brewers on a 1-year, $10 million deal with a club option. It might be a mutual option for next year. That is going to be pretty significant because of the news that came out afterwards, where they are going to be having Mike Moustakas during spring training try and play second base. Last year when they traded for him, they had him play third base, which is his natural position, and they moved Travis Shaw to second. Well, Shaw is a better defender than Moustakas at third, so they are actually going to try and have Moustakas play second, which is really big because he's going to have third base eligibility or corner infield eligibility in all leagues due to the amount of games he played last year. But if he even plays part of the time at second base for Milwaukee, he's going to pick up both second base and middle infield eligibility in fantasy leagues. That makes him, with his power numbers, immensely valuable. He jumped up big time on my rankings. He was already up there pretty big anyway because he's got 30 home run power, but now because he's going to have dual eligibility after a little bit of time, probably about the first couple of weeks, maybe as long as a month, but starting in May, he's going to have dual eligibility, which makes him very, very valuable. But we'll get into him probably sometime next week because I'm going to be doing the NL Central next week, and I'll be covering the Brewers at that point. But we'll get into him quite a bit then because he's going to be pretty studly this year because of that. So anyway, on to the Mets. Had a really bad year last year, but they were hurt a lot. Obviously, the good was really good and the bad was really bad. Jacob deGrom, I mean, what more can you say? He was a Cy Young winner last year. But just to show, just because he was a Cy Young winner doesn't mean he was necessarily awesome in fantasy. He was great for ERA and WHIP because he had insane numbers there. He struck out a lot of guys, but his win totals weren't big. I think he only won 12 games last year. So if you're in a league that highly values wins, he wasn't all that great for you this year. Now, the reason for that was, offensive output for the Mets. I mean, if there was a stat out that said if the Mets had scored 4 runs in every one of his starts, he would have went 30-0. Yeah, 30-0. So, and also the bullpen absolutely sucked last year. Trust me, I know. I watched enough games. And that is vastly improved this year, which we'll get into in a little bit. So lock Jake in. He's every format, everywhere you go. He should be one of the top 3 pitchers off the board. I don't see who you're taking ahead of him other than Max Scherzer, Chris Sale, maybe Verlander still. I'm not taking Kershaw ahead of him because the Dodgers just came out a little while ago. They shut him down indefinitely because of arm issues. And he's had back issues and stuff like that. So I'm definitely not taking Kershaw ahead of him. So there's not many guys I'm taking ahead of Jake. So he is going to be in that first grouping of pitchers. After that, Noah Syndergaard, he's got so much potential. If he could just learn how to pitch, if he could become a pitcher instead of a thrower, he'd be better than DeGrom because his stuff is better than DeGrom. So is this going to be the year that he finally puts it together and becomes, that ridiculously talented mega stud that we all think he can be? I hope so. Not only for the fantasy teams that I have him on, but personally because I'm a Met fan. So I really hope so. Zach Wheeler. He kind of started figuring it out last year. Second half of the year, he was almost as good as DeGrom. So if he can continue on that, plus the fact he's in a free agent year, so he's pitching for a contract. So he is definitely going to be a sleeper that I'm going to be targeting in a lot of leagues that I play. If I play in any redraft leagues this year, he's definitely going to be a guy I am looking to get my hands on, because I think there's going to be value there. I think because he plays for the Mets, let me put this because I'm in my car and now you can actually see me. I think because he plays for the Mets, he's going to get undervalued just because everyone expects the Mets to be a middle-of-the-road team again, maybe challenge for a wild card. But he can put up some stats. Same thing with Steven Matz. He finally had a fully healthy year last year, and he's always had good stuff. It's just whether or not he wants to figure it out. So, I mean, that's pretty much it. The fifth starter, if it's Jason Vargas, Lord help us all. I don't know what to say about that. I'm hoping and praying that we sign Gio Gonzalez, who's still out there on the free agent market. Brody Van Wagenen, if you are watching this, I don't know why you would be, but if you are, please go sign Gio Gonzalez. He's good. He's a horse. He pitches every 5 days, and he's good. I'd love to see us get Dallas Keuchel, but I don't think they're going to spend the money on a 2 or 3 year deal. If the market comes down where he's willing to take 1 year for like $12, $13 million, then maybe we'd consider it, but I don't think we're going to pay him a deal. So that's it for the starting rotation for the bullpen. It obviously starts and ends with Edwin Diaz. That was the big mega trade over the offseason, in which we also got Robbie Cano, and we sent Jay Bruce, Anthony Swarzak, and a couple of prospects. One of them I was okay with giving up. One of them hurts my heart. We'll get into that a little bit more when we get to the AL West and we talk about the Seattle Mariners. But I mean, to acquire a guy like Edwin Diaz, who's so young and so good, as opposed to going out and trying to sign a Craig Kimbrell at 5 years, $80-90 million, which is what the rumor is what he wants. I'm fully in agreement, even though it killed me to give up the prospects that we did. I think it's a great deal for the Mets. It was a fantastic move. People are killing the move because they don't understand baseball. Robbie Cano, even though he had the PED usage last year, and even though, he's getting up there in age a little bit, the man can flat out rake. He can hit. He still plays a decent defense. He's coming back to New York. He spent a lot of years here as a Yankee. He loves New York. I think he's going to be insanely motivated to show that now that he's back in the big city that he can still play. And with just a simple fact of that they might be instituting the DH in the National League within a year or two, that makes him really valuable for the Mets. I mean, so we're going to get into him in a second. He's one of my lock and loads for the Mets, honestly. He should be owned in all formats. So yeah, Diaz, I would absolutely give love to Jeurys Familia. I think if there's situations where Diaz has pitched 2 or 3 days in a row, if the Mets go on any kind of a winning streak, Familia will be able to step in very nicely on the days that Diaz might not be available. I think you can pencil Familia in for 15, 20 saves maybe. And if your league values holds, he's going to be the primary setup guy. I think between saves and holds, I think the numbers could be like 40 or 50. So I really think Familia holds a lot of value, and God forbid if Diaz gets hurt, Familia's closed in New York before. He was the Mets closer for quite a few years, so he feels comfortable in the role, and I think he could step in and do a fine job. Other than that, some of the middle relief options that you can look for strikeouts and some whip and some ERA help. Seth Lugo is good, and he also will get a spot start here and there. Robert Gesellman, same thing. Luis Avilion, who we signed, is pretty good. I would definitely look to him. Other than that, you kind of middle of the road guys, so I wouldn't pay too much attention there. So now let's get to the bats. Obviously, Cano was the big offseason acquisition for the bats. I think you can pencil him in for 280 to 300. He's going to hit 20 to 25 home runs, going to drive in 80 to 90 RBIs. And for a second base position, that's value. You're not going to have too many guys at the second base position who are going to put up better numbers than that. So I really think he's going to be one of the close to elite options at that position. So you need to have him in all formats, plug and play. Wilson Ramos, who is the Mets offseason acquisition, and oh my God, is that an upgraded catcher? Because Travis d'Arnaud and Kevin Plawecki, who we traded to Cleveland, Yeah, not done the job. Darno's a great trivia question. Just so you know this, for those of you who might want to know, the only person who was ever traded for 2 Cy Young Award winners before he reached the major leagues, Travis d'Arnaud. He was traded from Philly to Toronto in the Roy Halladay deal, and then was traded to the Mets in the R.A. Dickey trade, which also brought us Noah Syndergaard. So, it's a cool little piece of trivia. Cool trivia question, bad starting catcher, if you get my meaning. That's not to say that I don't think d'Arnaud might not have value. He actually put together a relatively decent season, and he looks like he's turned the corner health-wise. So, as a backup, if he gets 30, 40 starts, if they start him on days when we play interleague and they put Ramos in the DH to give him kind of a rest and he starts there, he'll play the back half of a doubleheader, day game after a night game sometimes. I think you could see him get 30 to 50 starts this year, and if that happens, he could easily put up 10 home runs. So in leagues where you have 2 catchers, I think he could have a little bit of value for you this year. I just think, he's not going to be a guy you look for in a redraft league or a single catcher league very early, just because he's not going to be the starter. So he's a guy you're going to be drafting at the extreme end of your draft. But there again, he's been a starting catcher before, and with having the pressure off, if he relaxes a little bit and all of a sudden responds, if Ramos gets hurt, which he does have injury history, and all of a sudden d'Arnaud has to get put into a starting role, he could be a sneaky sleeper. So I'm not going to ignore him 100%, but I'm not going to be moving heaven and earth to get him either. The other guys on the infield, Amed Rosario, who everyone forgets is still only like 22 years old. 21, 22 years old. So he has so much potential. He started to really turn it around the second half of last year. I think for the second half of the year, I think he had like 260, 270. He hit a few home runs. He stole some bases. If he can become a 20-20 guy and hit around 260, 270, he's going to have great fantasy value. So he's definitely a sleeper for me this year. I definitely am looking to see what he can do, if he can show that he has figured it out. He definitely is a guy he was one of the top prospects in baseball for a long time. So he's a guy who they expect to be able to figure it out and become a star. So we'll have to wait and see what happens as far as that goes. But he's a guy who's very intriguing for this year. Jeff McNeil was a midseason call-up last year, and he just flat out hit the ball. I mean, he can just rake. So his position is a little unclear. They're going to try him in the outfield. They don't know how that's going to work. If he doesn't work in the outfield, he'll get some utility infield usage. So it really just depends. His value is going to come based off of his defense. If he learns how to play the outfield, if he can handle, I think they're going to play him in right field, because I think it's going to be Conforto in left, Nimmo in center, and McNeil in right. Or it's going to be McNeil and Conforto flipped. But if he can handle the corner outfield position defensively wise, he's shown he can hit major league pitching. The kid hit like 320 last year in a couple of months of work. So if he can continue that, he's going to have value. He's a sleeper. He's a guy in dynasty leagues and keeper leagues you should be trying to get a hold of, because he can have long-term value. Jed Lowry, great depth pickup. I really, really liked the pickup. There's a little bit of a concern. He had a little bit of a tweak of his knee the other day, but they said it's not that serious. It's just going to give him some rest. It's one of those things, you come out from the winter and all of a sudden you start stretching and running and do that. All of a sudden you get a little tightness, but they said it's not anything to worry about. Now, if something happens, McNeil's going to get a bump in value because he'll be taking Lowry's place. I do believe Lowry is going to be probably the everyday third baseman. I believe Todd Frazier is going to be bumped down into a backup role and possibly a first base platoon, which we'll get into in a minute, which severely cuts Frazier's value, but Larry's value is going to be big. And again, like I said before with Mike Moustakas, Lowry has second base eligibility, so second base and middle infield. he's going to be valued at that all year because he played it last year. If he can pick up third base and corner infield eligibility, that just increases his value. Now, he's not as valuable at third base because of the fact that his pop. I mean, he hit over 20 home runs last year, but he's not your prototypical power hitter that you'd like to see at your corner infield positions. But because he has second base eligibility, he can play third base every day for the Mets, but you can have him in your second base spot in fantasy or middle infield. So that's where a lot of his value lies. I'm going to be trying to pick him up in quite a few leagues. So definitely want to look for that. Like I said, Frazier, I don't think is going to have too much value. He's old. He didn't hit worth a lick last year. He was injured a lot. Maybe playing in a part-time role might help keep him healthy, might keep him fresher, might have a little bit of value. If someone gets hurt, he obviously will step in. He's got some power still, but he should probably go undrafted in most leagues. Dominic Smith, no. That's all I have to say about him. No. Moving on to the outfield. Obviously, Michael Conforto. He's your big power guy on the Mets. He hit 28 home runs last year and was coming off of a very severe shoulder injury from the year before. And in my mind, they rushed him back. He wasn't even supposed to be back until May. He's like, oh, I'm good to go out of spring training. They started the year with him, and I don't think he was ready. So he had a horrendous first 5-6 weeks of the season. Even as good as the Mets were in the beginning part of the season last year, Conforto was terrible. So, and still ended the year with 28 home runs. He started hitting the ball the other way for power again. He started driving the ball in the gap, from gap to gap, which is his calling card, is gap to gap power and pop the other way. And he started doing that again last year. So if he can do that and if he can continue with that, he's going to be the man. He's going to take that spot that David Wright had for so long where you just can't shift on him in the outfield. You can't shift on him in the infield because he will take the ball wherever he wants to put it. And he's going to hit home runs. So I really think he could take the next step this year and hit 30 to 35 home runs. I'm hoping, please, because I own him in a lot of leagues, a lot of dynasty leagues, because I jumped on him very early when he was still in the minors. So I'm really hoping he has a huge year. Brandon Nimmo, gotta love that kid, the kid with the endless smile. So you gotta love him. He gets on base. He draws a lot of walks. He's not your prototypical leadoff guy. I really wish a Rosario would show that he could be the man to be the leadoff guy because I much prefer him as a leadoff guy. And then a guy like Nimmo batting either 2 or 5, maybe even 6. But he's going to get on base. He's not much of a stolen base threat. He'll steal a bag here or there. I want to see the power numbers increase a little bit more. He hit mid-teens, I think, last year, maybe 17, 18 home runs. I'd like to see it get over 20 this year. But he also, I think he didn't start the year with the Mets. I think he got called up in the middle of April, beginning of May. So just the extra time, I think, will allow him to get the little bit more power numbers. So he's going to be there. McNeil, who I already went over, he's probably going to be the starting outfielder as long as he shows that he can handle it. And then that brings us to Yoenis Cespedes. I don't know. Is he going to come back from the heel surgeries? Is he going to be what he was? Can he play defense? I mean, he's a free agent, so in keeper leagues, if you have a DL spot and you can stash him, I absolutely would, because he's either on his free agent deal, he's probably either going to go back to the American League where he can DH, or if they institute the DH next year in the National League, I mean, if he goes to one of the smaller parks in the National League, like let's say like Colorado, if Colorado signs him, he'd hit 70 home runs. So he's a guy that can still have value long term, but I'm not drafting him. But if you have him and you can stash him on your DL, keep him. If you get anything out of him this year, and I probably wouldn't draft him in a redraft league. I honestly think in a redraft league, he should go undrafted. And just keep an eye on his news that if it looks like he's going to come back, he might be a waiver wire pickup for the second half of the year. That's great. If you have him in a keeper league, I'm not using a keeper on him, but if you can get him late rounds to fill out your roster and then stash him on the DL, it's not a bad move. in Dynasty Leagues, I'm stashing him on the DL. I mean, there's nothing you can do. You probably either drafted him really high or traded a lot to get him or something like that. So you have to, at this point, keep him and see if he can be that guy, unless you're going to, like, maybe next year in the offseason, if you can dump him for any kind of value to a team who wants to contend the next year and is looking for him to come back and be a DH somewhere, that might be your move. You're not going to get value out of him this year, but you might get value out of him in the future, either from him coming back or in a trade. That leads us to the signing that we made a couple of months ago before spring training started. Oh, no, it was a trade, actually. We traded to Milwaukee for Keon Broxton. And I like this move. It's a really sneaky, under-the-radar move that Brodie Van Wagenen made. A couple of years ago, the guy hit 20 home runs and stole 20 bases. I think then he had the Willie Mays Hayes effect, if you remember from Major League, the movie, where all of a sudden he hit a couple of home runs and all of a sudden thought he was, the next Mark McGwire. I think he started swinging for the fences a little bit too much. Hopefully the coaching staff can get him back to being that speed guy, the guy flat out can play some defense. So I honestly think if McNeil, if he can't handle the outfield, I think Broxton is going to be one of the first guys to get the shot at an everyday outfield job. Juan Lagares, if he's healthy, he can get a shot too, because he's another guy who the offense hasn't really shown up yet, but the guy can flat out play defense. He's a Gold Glove winner. He just is injury prone every single year. He dives for a ball or goes into the wall and breaks his foot or breaks his arm, and he's out for the whole year. It happens every year. So, and I've gotten bid on him for like 3 years in a row where I'm like, oh, this is the year he's going to stay healthy and he's finally going to learn how to hit. He's going to hit 280 and steal 20 bags, and he gets hurt in May and is gone for the year, and I wasted a draft pick on him. So, yeah, those are two guys. They're flyers. They're late-round flyers, but they can pay you some dividends if the offense finally comes around. So now we get into one of the really fun parts about the Mets, and that's their prospects. And it's either feast or famine with their prospects right now, because they have a lot of good prospects in the upper reaches of the minors, and then they have a lot of good prospects in the very, very lower reaches of the minors, and not a lot in between. Especially being as we made a couple of deals and we made a couple of trades in the offseason, like I said. We traded a few of our decent prospects. We traded a pitcher, Justin Dunn, and we traded Jared Kelenic, who we had just drafted last year in the Robbie Cano, Edwin Diaz deal. So it kind of depleted the high end of the prospects, but not so much to where we don't have anything in the tank. Led by Peter Alonso. And there's one word that can describe Peter Alonso, and that is power. In the levels of the minors that he played in last year and the Arizona Fall League, which he played in last year, he hit over 40 home runs. He hit for a 285 average, and his on-base percentage was .395. Just in the minors, not counting his numbers from the Arizona Fall League, he hit 36 home runs and hit 119 RBIs. The two most impressive things I saw him do was in the Future Stars game at the All-Star game, where he hit probably one of the highest and longest home runs I've ever seen hit. The launch angle and the arc of the ball and everything, it was ridiculous. And then in the Future Stars game at the Arizona Fall League, I forget the guy's name. It might have been Forrest Whitley, the kid from Houston. I'll have to look and I'll check and I'll let you know in a future video. But I think it was Forrest Whitley, and the kid touches like 102, 103, and he threw one a little bit up and away, and Alonso just took it the other way and hit a home run, and it was off of a 102, 103 mile per hour fastball. And the announcers and the guys on the bench in the dugout were going absolutely nuts. They were like, oh my goodness, this guy's the real deal. And he is. He can just flat out hit. They're going to plug him. If he doesn't make the team right out of camp, they're going to wait like 2 weeks for his service time, so that way they get an extra year of arbitration out of him. And then he's going to get called up, and he's going to be the everyday first baseman. The only thing they're worried about with him is his defense, but I think he's going to hit enough to where they're really not going to care about his defense all that much. He's got to show that he can hit both hands, you know what I mean? They can hit lefties and righties. You may see a platoon situation a little bit to start while they break him in, but I think they're going to give him a genuine chance to hit everybody to see what happens. And if he can do anything like he's done at the minor league levels, stud. So he's a guy that he should be one of the, if he's not drafted in a keeper league or a dynasty league, get him now. If not, he should probably be in the first 5 to 10 prospects taken if you're doing any kind of a redraft league where if people know what they're doing and they're drafting prospects. The only prospects really that I think hitting prospects-wise that should be taken in a redraft league before him is probably Vlad Guerrero Jr. and maybe Eloy Jimenez. Other than that, he should be like in between the 3rd and 5th hitter off the board for prospects. He's the number 51 overall prospect in baseball, and he's the number 1 first base prospect in baseball. So that shows what they think of him. Moving on, you're going to go with Andres Jimenez, who's a shortstop prospect for the Mets. He's the number 58 overall prospect, and he's the number 7 prospect at the shortstop position. He hit 281 also last year, so that's really good for average. His on-base percentage was 347. Yeah, I would definitely like to see that a little bit higher. I want him to start walking a little bit more and getting on base because the kid has speed. He hasn't shown a ton of pop yet. He only had 6 home runs on 46 RBIs last year, but he had 38 stolen bases. So if he can raise that on-base percentage to like 380, 390, that stolen base total is going to go to 45 or 50, which is elite speed. So if you can, that's like Trey Turner. So if you can get your hands on him now, if you're going to have a needed shortstop, whether you have some older guys that are going to be retiring, or if you have if you have a needed shortstop, I would definitely get my hands on him. Because Ahmed Rosario is pretty much entrenched right now at the shortstop position, he could be a trade candidate. And also there's a couple guys. One guy I'm going to talk about this. If we are deep at anything right now, it's at the shortstop position in the minor leagues. So we have like 3 good shortstop prospects right now. So if Rosario shows that he's going to be the man, they're going to trade Jimenez for something they need, either pitching or hitting or whatever it might be. He's going to be a trade candidate. And if he gets traded to a team that's, terrible, like Miami, Kansas City, something along those lines, he could be up in the majors right away. He could be up because his speed plays now. His defense plays now. It's just whether his bat is going to come around the way they hope it will. So he could be in the majors pretty quickly. He could be a second half guy. He could definitely be in the majors next year, depending. So he's a guy definitely you should be paying attention to. He should be off the board in just about every prospect draft for keeper leagues and dynasty leagues. Don't know if he's so much going to draft. He should go undrafted in redraft leagues, but in all other formats, he should absolutely be on a roster somewhere. And if he's not, you need him on your roster. That brings us to the other top shortstop position prospect we have. That's Ronnie Mauricio. He didn't get a lot of time last year in the minor leagues because he was an international signing a couple years ago, and they just brought him over. But in his limited time, he had 55 hits, and 19 of them were for extra bases. And he's really young and can still grow into his body. So when you see that over a third of his hits are going for extra bases, that's what you want to see in a really, really young prospect like that, because hopefully as his body fills out, those extra base hits start going over the wall, and they're comparing him a lot to like an Alex Rodriguez type hitter. So please let that happen. I would love to see that happen. So yeah, but he's still a few years away. He should be on your radar if you're doing a prospect draft in a dynasty or a keeper league, but you don't need to know him before you play a redraft leagues. Mark Vientos, who is a third base prospect. Really, really good hitter, 287 average, 389 on-base percentage. That's what I like to see. I like to see the on-base percentage 100 points higher than the average. That means the guy walks a lot. He doesn't strike out all that much. That's really, really good to see. That's what you like to see out of a hitter. He had 11 home runs last year, 52 RBIs. So he's just starting to tap into his power a little bit. If he can get that going a little bit better, that's what you would definitely like to see. Definitely then you got the pitching prospects. You got David Peterson, who is a lefty. Last year, he pitched 128 innings. He struck out 115 guys, which is a little low. I'd like to see it a little bit closer to a 1-to-1 ratio, but he only walked 30 guys all year. So his walk to strikeout ratio is almost 4-to-1, and that's what I like to see. So that's solid. So if he could pick up the strikeouts a little bit more, he will definitely move into the upper rankings as far as pitching prospects go. Then you have one of our draft picks from last year, Simeon Woods Richardson, who got almost no time in the minor leagues because he was a draftee last year. So he only played he only had a couple of starts in rookie ball. But in 17 innings, he struck out 26 guys. And they're saying that his stuff just jumps off the page. And if he, another one of those guys where if his stuff improves and he learns how to pitch, he's going to be good for a long, long time. So he's definitely a guy you want to keep an eye on. He's going to be a guy I'm targeting in a lot of my prospect drafts this year. Then you have Anthony Kay, who's in his first full year back from Tommy John surgery. He pitched 122 innings, 123 strikeouts, so there you go, 1-1. That's what I love to see. He walked 49 guys, so that's a little high. I would like to see that come down a little bit, but also coming back for his first year from Tommy John surgery, that's gonna be up a little bit because control is the last thing to come back when you come back from Tommy John surgery. So I'm going to really take a close eye on where he's at through the first couple of months of this year and see, just where the control is at. And hopefully he'll be a little closer to that 3-to-1, 4-to-1 ratio that I like to see for walks to strikeouts. The last two guys, there are no stats on. Well, there's a little bit of stats on Franklin Kiome, but he didn't really pitch all that much last year. He came over from the Phillies in the trade that we made for Asdrubal Cabrera at the trade deadline. He's another one who his stuff jumps off the page, but unfortunately he blew out his arm last year. So he's going to be gone for the whole season this year with Tommy John surgery. So he'll be back on the prospect radar sometime next year. So he's definitely a guy that if you can pick him up in the late rounds of a prospect draft, or if God forbid, if no one drafts him and you can add him to your team later on for nothing, that'd be a really nice sneaky pickup that can pay a lot of dividends in a couple of years. And Thomas Szapucki, who was the Mets minor league pitcher of the year, I believe it was 2 years ago, but then had to have Tommy John surgery. He will be back this year. Another good quality lefty. So I would definitely keep an eye on him. So those are a couple of names that you're not going to see many stats on them, but their stuff is good enough to warrant some fantasy consideration as far as futures go. So that's pretty much it for the Mets. Hopefully they have a good season, both really on the field and fantasy-wise, because I own quite a few of them in quite a few leagues. I just got to do the Nationals, and then we'll be done with the National League East. So I'm going to try and do them over the next couple of days, and then we'll get going with the National League Central. So, as always, like, share, subscribe, comment, do all that kind of good stuff for me. And I will talk to you guys in a few days.